Hunting with the Bow and Arrow by Saxton Pope. Read by Bambery. Dedicated to Robin Hood, a spirit that at some time dwells in the heart of every youth. Chapter 13. Mountain Lions. The cougar, panther, or mountain lion is our largest representative of the cat family. Early settlers in the eastern states record the existence of this treacherous beast in their conquest of the forests. The cry of the painter, as he was called, rang through the dark woods and caused many hearts to quaver and little children to run to mother's side. Once in a while stories came of human beings having met their doom at the swift, stealthy leap of this dreaded beast. He was bolder than now. Today he is not less courageous, but more cautious. He has learned the increased power of man's weapons. Our Indians knew that he would strike, as they struck, without warning, at an advantage. It is a matter of tradition among frontiersmen that he has, upon rare occasions, attacked and killed bears. Even today he will attack man if provoked by hunger, and can do so with some assurance of success, the statements of certain naturalists to the contrary notwithstanding. John Captain Adams, in his Adventures, describes such an episode. The lion, in this instance, sprang upon a companion, seized him by the back of the neck, and bore him to the ground. He was only saved from death by the thick buckskin collar of his coat and the ready assistance of Adams, who heard the cry for help. I know of an instance where a California lion leaped upon some bathing children and attempted to kill them, but was driven off by the heroic efforts of a young woman schoolteacher, who in turn died of her wounds. Those of us who have roamed the wilds of the western country have had varying experiences with this animal, while others have lived their lives in districts undoubtedly infested with cougars and have never seen one, although nearly every mountain rancher has heard of that hair-raising, almost human scream echo down the canyon. It is like the wail of a woman in pain, penetrating and quavering. It rings out in the night gloom, and brings to the human what it must, in a similar way, bring to the lesser animals a sense of impending attack, a death warning. It is part of the system of the predatory beast that he uses fear to weaken the powers of his prey before he assaults it. Animal psychology is essentially utilitarian. Cowering, trembling, muscularly relaxed, on the verge of emotional shock, we are easier to overcome. The cougar lives principally on deer. His kills average more than 1 a week, and often we find evidence that this murderer has wantonly slain 2 or 3 deer in a single night's expedition. It is not in his habit to lie in wait on the limb of a tree, though he often sleeps there. But he makes a stealthy approach upon the unsuspecting victim. Then, with a series of stupendous bounds, he throws himself upon the deer, and by his momentum bears it to the ground. Here, while he holds on with his teeth and forelegs, he rips open the flank with his hind claws and immediately plunges his head into the open abdomen, where he tears the great blood vessels with his teeth and drinks its life blood. These are the facts learned from lion hunters whose observations are accurate and reliable. A lion can jump a distance greater than 24 feet, and has been seen to ascend at a single leap a cliff of rock 18 feet high. Their weight runs from 100 to 200 pounds, and the length from 6 to 9 feet. The skin will stretch farther than this, but we count only the carcass from the tip of the nose to the tip of the extended tail. The speed of a lion for a short distance is greater than that of a greyhound, less than 5 seconds to the 100 yards. Some observers contend that the lion never gives that blood-curdling cry assigned to him. They say that he is silent, and that this classic scream is made by a lynx in the mating period. However, popular experience to the contrary seems to be too strong, and counterbalances this iconoclastic opinion. For many years, off and on, we have hunted lions, but sad to say, we have done more hunting than finding. They are a very wary creature. Practically one never sees them unless hunting with dogs. They may be in the brush within 30 yards, but the human eye will fail to discern them. Our camps have been robbed by lions, our horses killed by them, cattle and sheep ruthlessly murdered. Lion tracks have been all about, and yet, unless trapped or treed by dogs, we have never met. Camping at the base of Pico Blanco in Monterey County several years ago, a lion was seen to bound across the road and follow a small band of deer. At this very spot, a few seasons before, one leaped upon an old mare with foal and broke her neck as she crashed through the fence and rolled down the hill. 3 years later, I rode the young horse as we passed the tree from which it thought the lion sprang. Where the broken fence was still unmended, my colt jumped and reared. The memory of his fright was still vivid in his mind. Up the trail, a half-mile beyond, we saw other fresh lion tracks. At night, we camped on the ridge with our dogs and hoped that our feline friend would come again. It was too late to hunt that evening, so we turned in. Nothing happened, save that in the middle of the night I was roused by the whine of our dogs, and looking up in the face of the pale moon, I saw 2 deer go bounding past, silhouetted like graceful phantoms across the silvered sky. They swept across the lunar disk and melted into the blackness over the dark horizon. No sound followed them, and having appeased the fretful hounds, we returned to sleep. In the morning, up the trail, there were his tracks. Too wise to cross the human scent, and knowing that there are more deer in the brush, he had turned upon his course and let his quarry slip. Because of the heat and the inferior tracking capacity of our dogs, we never got this panther. A lion dog is a specialist and must be trained that no other track will divert him from his quest. These dogs are willing but erratic. The best dogs for this work are mongrels. By far the finest lion dog I ever saw was a cross between a shepherd and an Airedale. He had the intelligence of the former and the courage of the latter. The Airedale himself is not a good trailer, and he is too temperamental. He will start on a lion track, jump off, and chase a deer, and wind up by digging out a ground squirrel. After a good hound finds a lion, the Airedale will tackle him. We once started an Airedale on a lion track, followed him at a fiendish pace, dashed down the side of a mountain, and found that he had an Angora goat up a tree. This cougar on Pico Blanco still roams the forest, so far as I know, and many with him. Once we saw him across a canyon. He appeared as a tawny, slow-moving body, as large as a deer, but low to the earth and trailing a listless tail, while his head slowly swung from side to side. He seemed to be looking for something on the ground. For the space of 100 yards, we watched him traverse an open side hill, deep in ferns and brakes. Seeing him thus was little satisfaction for us, for we had lost our dogs. Ferguson and I were returning from one of our unsuccessful expeditions. We started with 2 saddle horses, a pack animal, and 5 good lion dogs. On the trail to the Ventana Mountains, we came across the lion tracks and followed them for a day, then lost them. But we knew that a large male and young female were ranging over the country. Their circuit extended over a radius of 10 miles. They are great travelers. The track of the lion is characteristic. The general contour is round, from 3 to 4 inches in diameter. There are 4 toe prints arranged in a semicircle which show no claw marks, but the ball of the foot is the unmistakable feature. It consists of 3 distinct eminences or pads which lie parallel anterio-posteriorly and appear in the track as if you had pressed the terminal phalanges of your fingers side by side in the dust. These marks are nearly equal in length and absolutely identify the big cap. On the morning of the 2nd day of our trailing this lion, our pack was working down in the thick brush below the crest of the Rattlesnake Ridge, when suddenly they raised a chorus of yelps. There was a rush of bodies in the Chamish brush, and the chase was on at a furious pace. We rode up to an observation point and saw the dogs speeding down the canyon side, close on the heels of a yellow leaping demon. They switched from side to side as the cat and dog races have been carried on since time immemorial. The undergrowth was so dense that we could not follow, so we sat on our horses and waited for them to tree. But further and further they descended. They crossed the bottom, mounted a cliff on the opposite side, came scrambling down from this and plunged into the bed of the stream, where their voices were lost to the hearing. We rode around to a spur of the hill that dipped into the brush and overhung the canyon. From this we heard occasional barks away down at least a mile below us. It was a difficult situation. Nothing but a blue jay could possibly get down to the creek below. I never saw such a jungle, so we waited for the indications that the lion was treed, but all became silent. Evening approached, we ate our supper and then sat on the hill above, sounding our horns. Their vibrant echoes rang from the mountain to mountain and returned to us clear and sweet. Way down below us, where a puzzled haze hung over the deep ravine, we faintly heard the answering hounds. In their voices we caught the dog's response to his master and friend. It said, "We have him. Come, come." We blew the horns again, and the elf-lend notes returned again and again, and with them came the call of the faithful hound. "We are here. Come, come." Now there was a pitiful plight. No sane man would venture down such a chasm, impenetrable with thorns, and night descending. So we built a beacon fire and waited for dawn. All during the long dark hours we heard the distant appeal of the hounds, and we slept little. At the first rays of dawn, we took a hasty meal, fed our horses, stripping ourselves of every unnecessary accoutrement. We prepared to descend the canyon. Our bows and quivers we left behind because it would have been impossible to drag them through the jungle. Ferguson carried only his Colt pistol. I took my hunting knife. Having surveyed the topography carefully, we attacked the problem at its most available angle and slid from view. We literally dived beneath the brush. For more than 2 hours, we wormed our way down the face of the mountain, crawling like moles at the base of an overhanging thickness of poison oak, wild lilac, jasmine, sage, manzanita, hazel, and buckthorn. At last we reached the depth of the canyon, and, finding little water, we bathed our sweat-grim faces and cooled off. No sound of the dogs was heard, but pressing forward, we followed the boulder-strewn bottom of the creek for a mile or more, almost despairing of ever finding them, when suddenly we came upon a strange sight. There was the pack in a circle about a big reclining oak. They were voiceless and utterly exhausted, but sat watching a huge lion crouched on a great overhanging limb of the tree. The moment we appeared, they raised a feeble, hoarse yelp of delight. The panther turned his head, saw us, and sprang from the tree with a prodigious bound, landed on the hillside, tore down the canyon, and leaped over a precipice below. The dogs, heartened by our presence, with an instant accord, charged after the lion. When they came to the precipice drop in the bed of the stream, they whined a second, ran back and forth, and then mounted the lateral wall, circled sideways, and, by a detour, gained the ground below. We ran and looked over. The drop was at least 30 feet. The cat had taken it without hesitation, but we were absolutely stalled. Even if we had cared to take the risk of the descent, we saw so many similar drops beyond that situation was hopeless. The dogs, having lost their voices, we were at a great disadvantage, so we returned to the tree to rest and meditate. There we saw the evidence of the long vigil of the night. All about its base were little nests, where the tired dogs had bedded down and kept their wary watch. Their incessant barking had served to keep the cougar treed, but it cost them a temporary loss of voice. Poor devils, they had our admiration and sympathy. At noon, hearing nothing from the hounds, we decided to return to camp. If coming down was hard, going up was Herculean. We crawled on hands and knees, dragged ourselves by projecting roots, panted, rested, and worked again. After 3 hours' struggle, we came out upon a rough ledge of granite, a mile below the spot which we aimed, but near enough to the top to permit us, after a little more brush fighting, to gain our camp and lie down, too fatigued to eat. For another day we remained at this place, hoping that the dogs would return, but in vain. At last we decided to pack up and go around a 10-mile detour and work up the other outlet of the canyon. We left a mess of food and several piles for the dogs should they return, and knew they could follow our horses' tracks if they came to camp. But our detour was futile. We lost all signs of our pack and returned to our headquarters to await results. It was on this homeward journey that we saw the lion of Pico Blanco and had to let him slip. 10 days later, 2 weak, emaciated hounds came into camp, an old veteran and a young dog that trailed after him as if tied with a rope. He had followed him to save his life, and for days after he could not be separated without whining with fear. We fed them carefully and nursed them back to health. But these were all of the 5 to appear. Old Belle, the greatest fighter of them all, was gone. She must have met her death at the claws of the cougar, for nothing else could keep her. This ended that particular lion hunt. In our travels over California in search for cougars, we have picked up more tales than trails of the big cats. Just before one of my visits to Gorda on the Monterey coast, a panther visited the Mansfield Ranch in broad daylight. Jasper, being on the mountainside after deer, his wife, left at home with the 2 children, noticed a very large lion out in the pasture back of the house. It wandered among the cattle in a most unconcerned manner and did not even cause a stir. While it did not approach any of the cows very closely, they seemed to be not in the least alarmed. For half an hour or more it stayed in the neighborhood of the house, where Mrs. Mansfield locked herself in and waited for her husband's return. It was not until evening, and too late to track the beast, that Jasper came home, so no capture was made. Some time before this, one of the hired hands on the ranch was going to his cabin in the dusk, and swinging his hand idly to catch the tops of tall grass by the side of the path, he suddenly touched something warm and soft. Instantly he grasped a handful of the substance. At the same moment, some sort of animal bounded off in the dark. Holding fast to the material in his hand, he ran back to the farmhouse and found his fistful of lion hair. To say that he was startled puts it very mildly. Apparently one of these beasts had been crouched on a log by the side of the path, waiting for something to turn up. The hired man took a lantern home with him after that. At another ranch on the Big Sur River, one of the little boys called to his mother that there was a funny sort of big dog out in the pasture. His mother paid no attention to it, but a diminutive pet black and tan started an assault on the animal in question. The lion and the dog disappeared in the brush. Presently the canine barking ceased, and the small boy wondered what become of his valiant companion. In a few minutes he heard a plaintive whine up in the nearby tree, and running to its base he found that the panther had seized his pet by the nape of the neck and climbed a tall fir with him. The boy ran for his father, working in the fields, who, bringing his rifle, dispatched the panther. As it fell from the tree, the little dog clung to the upper limbs and stayed at the top. Nothing they could do would coax him down. The fir was one difficult to climb, so to save time the man took an axe and felled the tree, which, falling gently against another, precipitated the canine hero to the ground without harm. Later I had the pleasure of shaking his paw and congratulating him on his bravery. After many futile attempts, at last our opportunity to get a Felis concolor arrived. We received word from a certain rancher station in Tuolumne County that a mountain lion was killing sheep and deer in the immediate vicinity. Having the promise of a well-trained pack, Arthur Young and I gathered our archery tackle and started from San Francisco at night in an automobile. We traveled until the small hours of the morning, and then lay down on the side of the road to take a short sleep, and rising at the first gray of dawn, sped on our way. We reached the Sierras by sunup and began to climb. At noon we met our guide above the Italian bar, and prepared for an evening hunt. This, however, was as unsatisfactory as evening hunts usually are. A morning expedition the next day only brought out the fact that our lion had left the country. News of his activities 12 miles further up the mountains having been obtained, we gathered our bows, arrows, and dogs and departed for this region. Here we found a bloody record of his work. More than 200 goats had been killed by the big cat in the past year. In fact, the rancher thought that several panthers were at work. Goats were taken from beneath the shepherd's nose, and as he turned in one direction, another goat would be killed behind him. It seemed impossible to apprehend the villain. Their dogs were useless. Equipped for rough camping, we soon planned our morning excursion and bedded down for rest. At 3 o'clock we waked, ate a meager breakfast, and hit the trail up the mountain. We knew the general range of our cougar. It is necessary in all his tracking to get in the field while the dew is on the ground and before the sun dissipates it, also before the goats obliterate the tracks. Arrived at the crest of the ridge, we struck a well-defined goat trail, and soon the fresh tracks of a lion were discovered. Our dogs took up the scent at once, and we began to travel at a rapid pace. Here again one must have a good pair of legs. If automobiles, elevators, and general laziness have not ruined your powers of locomotion, you may follow the dogs. Otherwise, you had best stay at home. At first we walk, then we trot, and with a leap the hounds start in a full cry. We race. Regardless of 5,000 feet of altitude, regardless of brush, rocks, and dizzy cliffs, we follow at a breakneck pace. I don't know where our breath comes from in these trails. We just have to run. In fact, we have planned to run on our hands when our legs play out. With pounding hearts, we surge ahead. Keep the dogs within hearing. I can't last long. But this time we come to a sudden halt on a rocky slide. We've lost the scent. The dogs circle and backtrack and work with feverish haste. The sun has risen, and up the mountainside comes a band of goats, led by a single shepherd dog. No man in sight. We shout to the dog to steer his rabble away, but on they come and obliterate our trail with thousands of hoofprints and a cloud of dust. The sun then comes out, and our day is gone. No Felis this time. So we scout the country for information to be used later, and return to camp to drown our sorrow in food. This was my first knowledge that a dog could be placed in charge of a flock of sheep or goats. It seems that these little sheepdogs, not even collies, but some shaggy little plebeians, are given full charge of the band. They lead them out to pasture, guard them, and keep them together during the day and bring them home at night. They will, when properly instructed, take a band of goats out for a week on a long route and bring them all safely home again. At least they used to until this lion appeared on the scene. That evening we asked the rancher to lock his goats in the corral until noon. Next morning we rose again in time to see the morning star glittering in the undimmed glory. Up the trail we mounted, the dogs eager for the chase. An old owl in a hollow tree asked us again and again who we were. All else was silent in the woods. Saving our strength, we arrived quietly on the upper ridges and waited for the dawn. Way down below us in the canyon, we could smell the faint incense of our campfire. The morning breeze was just beginning to breathe in the trees. The birds awoke with little whispered confidences, small twitterings and chirps. A faint lavender tint melted the stars in the eastern sky. Shadows crept beneath the trees, and we knew it was time to start. Just as the light defined the margins of the trail, we picked up in the grayness the track of a lion. Strange to say, the dogs had not smelled it, but when we pointed to the footprint in the dust, which was apparently none too fresh, they took up the work of tracking. It is astonishing to see how a dog can tell which way a track leads. If in doubt, he runs quickly back and forth on the scent, and thus gauges the way the animal has progressed. A mediocre dog cannot do this, but we had dogs with college educations. Traveling carefully and at a moderate pace, we came to an open knoll in the forest. Here in the ferns our pack circled about us as if the cat had been doing a circus stunt, and they seemed confused. Later on, we found that our feline friend had been experimenting with a porcupine and learned another lesson in natural history. Suddenly the leader sniffed at a fallen tree where, doubtless, the cat had perched. Then, with a ringing bay, the hound clamped his tail close to his rump and left in a streak of yellow light. The rest of the pack leaped into full cry. We were off on a hot track. Oh, for the wings of a bird! Trained as Young and I were to desperate running, this game taxed us to the utmost. First we climbed the knoll, deep in ferns and mountain misery. Then we dashed over the crest, tore through the manzanita brush, thickets of young cedar and buckthorn, over ledges of lava rock, down deep declivities among giant oaks, cedars, and pines. As we ran, we grasped our ready-strung bows in one hand and the flapping quivers in the other. You would not think that at this time we could take note of the fragrant shrubs and pine needles beneath our feet, but I smelled them as I passed in flight, and they revived me to renewed energy. On we rushed, only to lose the sound of the dogs. Then we listened and caught it down the hill below us. Again we hurdled barriers of brush, took long sliding leaps down the treacherous shale, and ran breathless to the shade of a great oak. There above our heads was the lion. Oh, the beauty of that beast! Heaving and giddy with exertion, we saw a wonderful sight. A great, tawny, buff-colored body, crouched on a limb, grace and power in every outline. A huge, soft, cylindric tail swung slowly back and forth. Luminous eyes gazed at us in utmost calm, a cold, calculating calm. He watched and waited our next move, waited with his great muscles tense for action. We retreated, not only to get out of his reach, but to gain a better shooting position. As we did this, he gave a lithe leap to a higher limb and shielded himself as best he could behind the boughs of the tree. From our position, his chest and throat were visible through a triangular space in the branches, not more than a foot across. We must shoot through this. His attitude was so huddled that his head swung over his shoulder. Young and I caught our breath, drew our arrows from our quivers, nocked them, and set ourselves in our archer's stable stand. We drew together and at mutual thought shot together. Because of our unsteady condition, our arrows flew a trifle wild. Mine buried itself in the lion's shoulder. Young's hit him in the nose. He reared and struck at this latter shaft, then, not dislodging it, began swaying back and forth, while with both front paws he fought the arrow. While he thrashed about thus in the treetop, we knocked 2 more arrows and shot. We both missed the brute. Young's flew off into the next state, and if you ever go up to Tuolumne County, you'll find mine buried deep in the heart of an oak. Just as we knocked a 3rd arrow, he freed himself from the offending shaft in his muzzle, raised his forepaws upon a limb, and prepared to leap. In that moment he bared the white hair of his throat and chest, and like a flash 2 arrows were driven through his heart area. As they struck and disappeared from sight, he leapt. Like a flying squirrel, he soared over our heads. Full 75 feet he cleared in one mighty outbound, downward bound. I saw his body glint across the rising sun, swoop in a wonderful curve, and land in a sheltered bush. The dogs threw themselves upon him. There was a medley of sounds, a fierce but brief fight, and all was over. We grabbed him by the tail and dragged him forth, dead. The ringleader of our pack, trembling with excitement, effort, and fighting frenzy, drove all the other dogs away and took possession of the body. No one but a man, his master, might touch it. Our lion was a young male, 6 feet 8 inches from tip to tip, and weighing a little over 120 pounds. Later, as we skinned him, we found his paws full of porcupine quills, speaking loudly of his recent experience. The stomach was empty. The chest was full of blood from our arrows. He was as easy to kill as a deer. We packed him back to camp and added his photograph to our rogues gallery. There was no further goat killing on that Sierra ranch. This was our first lion, and for me so far, my only one. Arthur Young, however, has been fortunate enough to land 2 cougars by himself on another hunting trip. Captain C.H. Stiles, a recent addition to the ranks of field archers, while on an expedition to cut yew staves in Humboldt County, California, started a mountain lion, ran him to bay with hounds, and killed him with 1 arrow in the chest. We shall undoubtedly hear more of the captain later on. But so long as we can draw a bowstring and our legs hold out, and there is an intelligent dog to be had, it will not be the last lion on our list. Wherever there are deer, there will be found panthers, and it is our business to help reduce their number in the game fields to maintain the balance of power.